Hey legends, because I want to show you how to quickly install the Shimano crank arm. This is on a press fit bottom bracket. I have other videos that I did about how to install the bottom bracket, and what I've done here, I've put the seal here that keeps the grease in there. They come lubed, and you want to put that seal on that keeps water out and everything. And then they give you, and this only applies to press fit bottom bracket, you're going to need these two O-rings installed on the crank arm. So it's important that you read the instructions for your particular bottom bracket if you have a treaded bottom bracket. But as far as installing a crank arm, regardless of the bottom bracket that's on the bike, the install is the same. So I mean, once the bottom bracket is installed, whether you have a English bottom bracket, Italian treaded, or in this case press fit, you want to make sure that you lube the shaft of your crank arm. So let's see, let's get this, and you can use any kind of grease. I'm going to use just axle grease here. Got them over here. I'm going to use, this is made by Phil Lube. I mean, actually this is a part 2. I'm out of my Phil wood. This is part 2. You can use anything for bicycle components, but you want a grease. You don't want a thin lube, because you're not going to be getting in here messing with this. So right here on the shaft, because it's going to be sitting inside, especially near here, this is where they will be rolling around on touch the bearing, because the bearing is, remember, the bearing is in here. So anything that's going to spin on that, you want to have lube on it. So really, for the most part, you need the lube closer to the end. You don't need it in the middle as much. So what I'm doing here, I just put a thin layer on the whole shaft. And then I put right here where we're going to have the other crank arms sit on these, this kind of like has almost like notches. That's where you want to put your lube. Anywhere metal meets metal, put your lube on there. In the middle, not so much, but I just lube the whole thing. You know, just a thin layer, and then towards the end, you put that on there. All that is just prevents the metal from touching each other. And that's why you're using grease, because in the middle, there's nothing really going on, but that would be splitting hairs. I mean, you know, so put the thicker amount at the end, but lube the whole thing so you're done. You don't want to be going in there doing anything. So before you put the crank arms in your particular bottom bracket, make sure that your bottom bracket requirement for having any kind of O-rings or whatever installed is on the crank arm first. The BB Bright bottom bracket requires an O-ring on the crank arm. This O-ring basically is just a rubber O-ring. I'm going to slide on the crank arm here. And just move it up against. Biggest thing to remember is your chain must be on the inside. In fact, what I always do, just to make sure I don't mess up and put this in without doing the chain, then you have to break the chain, is I slide this in, and as I'm doing it, I make sure I go ahead and put the chain on the small chain ring. So all you want to do is slide the shaft through. There we go. And see, I'm going to shift the gear to line up the chain here. Just bring the chain line down so it can get on there. Okay, good. So it's not, because it's not quite all the way. There we go. Okay. You think it would just go through, but no, you got to bang on it. The good thing is that means the tolerances are right, but they're pretty standard. You see here, I'll show you something here. This is what came off the bike. This is thicker than the Shimano. So if you don't have the right bottom bracket, the shaft won't fit. This shaft will not fit this bottom bracket. This circumference is wider. So it's important that you get, if you're dealing with press fit, that you get the right bottom bracket. So now we have a thicker bottom bracket here that can accommodate Shimano's spindle, because we're going from rotor to Shimano. We're going from a 30 to a 24 millimeter spindle. So the spindle's thinner, and it was important to get the right bottom bracket. That's where I spent the most time. I had to take the old stuff off the bike and measure everything to be able to get the right bottom bracket. But anyway, we're talking about bottom bracket install, but it's just important. So what I want to do now, this is in there. Most of the work is done. All you do for the opposite side is the O-ring will go on the end of the shaft that is on this side of the bottom bracket. Move the frame that way so you can see. So the O-ring is going to go on this shaft. That O-ring will keep that orange looking seal from moving. That's what it's there for. Put this down so I can use both of my hands. So it's kind of tight and it's designed to not come off easily. It's very tight. All that O-ring does, it keeps this orange bad boy in place. Without the O-ring, that thing can move and get adhered to the crank arm, and you don't want that. So it's important that when you're installing, whether it's Shimano or whatever crank sets, you make sure that you accommodate the requirements of your particular bottom bracket. And I'm going to put some lube, even though I lube those threads, I'm going to put some lube on this part too. You can see the teeth in there. That's what meshes with the teeth that you saw on the end of the spindle. And I will turn the bike so you can see how I do this. So I'm just going to take just a dab of grease here and just put it in here. Anywhere you got metal touching metal on the bicycle, you want to lube it. It's just a good idea. Easy insurance against creaks and oxidation and all that stuff, because aluminum oxidizes, especially when it's in contact with steel. What is important is when you put this on here, you need to make sure it's in the right position. What it means is don't let your crank arm on this side be in the same down position and then you put this in a down position. You can't ride like that. It will still go in there. So what I do is I put this, want to make sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up with the seat tube and make sure that this one is pointing straight down. That's just easy insurance to make sure. And you just fit it on there. Now you know it's in the right place. Because what happens is you can have it in the wrong position and not really realize it, especially with the bike on the stand. So by using the seat tube as the gauge, it's lined up with the seat tube and that is straight down with the seat tube, that you know they're perpendicular to each other. And that's what you want. Because sometimes it's hard to tell if you do 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock. So that's just simple insurance. So now they're on the bike and the install is done. Shimano actually put a stamp on this thing, which is cool. It says, each of the bolts should be evenly and torqued equally to 12 to 14 Newton meters by torque wrench. These are the little bolts in the recess here. There's one on this side. There's one on that side. And I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave that message on the crank arm. I'm not taking it off, and I would suggest that he leaves it there just in case somebody else works on his bike in the future. So what I'm going to do is, before I even get to the torque wrench, is just tie that down. I'm just going to go around. The bolts come loose. So I'm going to go just around. That's what I mean by evenly. Don't tighten one side more than the other, because you're bringing it, you're crimping them. So quarter turn there. I'm just gently tightening it. Nice snug. And I'm going to do it by hand until it stops. Then I'll break out the torque wrench to verify. It's still relatively, so as you tighten each side, the other side settles. So you want to do it just a little more there, a little more there. I can't get this side to work because it's too fat. It's touching the frame, so the tool doesn't line up. So I'm using the long side. The long side, the problem is it has those little, almost like a ball on the end, and it doesn't do well in high torque situations. It's good to start things. You could just tighten this by feel, But why take the chance? If you have a torque wrench, use a torque wrench. There's no reason to take the chance. Once again, it's very nice to have the right tools. I took this off my tool rack just to show you. These are socket sets for Allen bolts. So I'm going to take a 5 and put it in here. I'm going to set it to say 12 Newton meters. It said 12 to 14. I don't have to max it out per se. Even though Allen's a big boy, I'll set it to 13. Split the difference. I don't like to max out anything. You do it the same way again. Even with the torque wrench, you do one side. So it's in there. I don't need an extension, I don't think. I shouldn't. It's a tight spot you're working in. Go a little bit. I'm going to spin it around. I don't want to torque one side and then this is easier to work with because it's outside. So I'll do 2 turns on this one. Make sure it's in before you turn because it's a small parts they can strip. So make sure the Allen nut goes in well. Feel it go in before you turn. Okay, it's nice and tight. I'm going to go back to the other side. Make sure it goes in once again. See right there, it wasn't in. I'll turn quite a bit, almost like a half turn. See, it's not in yet. I'm trying to find the spot because this is a tight spot with it being close to the frame. I want to make sure I get a spot where it sits in there properly. There, it's in. That's important. Whether you're doing a torque wrench or not, make sure your tool, even if you're working on your stem bolt, make sure the tool sits before you turn. Using a torque wrench takes the guesswork out of it. There. It clicked. That's torqued. Make sure this is in. There. 13 Newton meters. I'm very careful with torque wrenches, especially on small parts, because you can still harm things if you use too much torque. Just because it's a torque wrench doesn't mean it can't do any damage. It's important to pay attention to what the manufacturer says. And what I did in my case, just to be extra cautious, I split the difference. They said 12 to 14. These are human beings. It's a judgment call. 12 to 14, okay, I'll take 13. Doesn't have to be that. That's a lot of torque on that little part. It's not going anywhere. That's not going to come off. That removes the guesswork. So the bike's done. That's how you install a Shimano crank arm on a bike. It doesn't matter what kind of drivetrain, a bottom bracket you have on there. The install is the same because Shimano crank arm has one shaft and you put that on there and you tie it down. So whether you're doing a power meter install where stages install something on there and ship to your crank arm, that's how you do it. You don't play around with a torque because if that thing comes loose, you can fall. The crank arm is not the part of the bike you want to save weight or get cute with. Don't play around with it. It needs to be stopped.